Scotland. Land of misty islands. Land of rugged coastlines. Land of ancient castles and traditions. A fine rain bathes ancient valleys. The sound of bagpipes echoes through the streets. The dark waters of the lochs reflect infinite skies. Welcome to Scotland. Welcome to a magical land. Known for its unique landscapes, this is a place where time flows to the rhythm of Atlantic tides, where over 790 islands dot deep blue waters, and where Gaelic still resonates like an ancient song. But let's start from the beginning. Scotland stretches like a geological mosaic above England, divided into 3 distinct regions that tell the story of the Earth itself. The northern Highlands guard ancient rocks of 3 billion years, witnesses to a primordial planet. While the central belt reveals the treasures of the underground with its coal and iron deposits that forge the industrial destiny of the nation. To the south, the southern uplands instead rise like gentle sedimentary hills in a landscape that seems painted with brushstrokes of emerald green. In this land, nature has sculpted 2 completely different coasts. The eastern one, gentle and welcoming with its sandy beaches that stretch toward the North Sea, and the western one, wild and jagged, where deep fjords carved by ancient glaciers bite the land like divine scars. Here, the climate itself reflects this geographical duality. While the west, caressed by the Atlantic current, wraps the islands in a humid and rainy embrace, the east offers drier and sunnier days, as if 2 different souls coexisted under the same sky. In this extraordinary landscape, furthermore, the population is 5.5 million inhabitants and concentrates mainly in the central belt, between Edinburgh and Glasgow, leaving the vast Highlands, which by the way represent about 2/3 of Scottish territory, to maintain the lowest population density in Europe, creating a silence that amplifies the voice of the wind and traditions. This low population density is also confirmed by the over 790 islands that dot Scottish waters, of which only about 90 are inhabited, but each one guards a distinct local culture. Skye, Mull, Arran, the Orkneys, and the Outer Hebrides are worlds unto themselves. Places where traditions still live in daily life, where Scottish Gaelic still resonates, keeping alive a fundamental part of Scottish cultural identity. Continuing, this nation guards 90% of the United Kingdom's fresh water, thanks to its over 30,000 lakes, called lochs, and which often reflect stormy skies and majestic mountains. Loch Lomond, for example, is the largest lake by surface area, while Loch Ness hides in its depths not only ancient legends, but also the largest volume of fresh water in the nation. And then there are the Scottish clans, which still exist and have recognized chiefs. Each clan has its own tartan, and that is that distinctive pattern of the traditional kilt, which originally was born as a practical garment for Highland shepherds. It was a sort of enveloping blanket that allowed freedom of movement among the heather and could transform into nighttime shelter. Today, precisely the patterns on the kilt still tell stories of belonging and honor, while many castles remain still inhabited by the original families. Finally, Scottish whiskey, which is the precious Scotch, is not simply a beverage, but a true cultural art that expresses itself through different producing regions, each with its own distinctive character, from the peated notes of the Hebridean Islands to the delicate flavors of the lowlands. Scotland, therefore, is much more than a simple nation. It is an entire world, a place that continues to tell its ancient story to anyone who visits it or wants to discover it. But now, let's go discover the most incredible places of this land. Edinburgh. The Scottish capital is a city that strikes at first glance. Edinburgh rises on 7 volcanic hills, and every corner tells centuries of history. The center divides into 2 completely different parts: the medieval Old Town, with the castle that dominates from atop its rock, and the 18th century New Town, with straight and elegant streets that seem drawn with a ruler. The Royal Mile is the most famous street. It connects the castle, which seems to emerge directly from the rock, to Holyrood House Palace through a kilometer of cobblestones and history. Edinburgh's architecture tells 2 different eras. In the Old Town, the buildings rise up to 14 floors, true medieval skyscrapers, built in dark stone. In the New Town instead, Georgian houses of golden sandstone dominate, with their symmetrical facades and colored doors that create postcard-worthy views. But to truly understand Edinburgh, you must climb Arthur's Seat, the ancient volcano 251 meters high that watches over the capital. From its summit, you see the entire city spread below, with the North Sea shining on the horizon. This is perhaps the most beautiful view in Scotland. Isle of Skye. Where Scotland meets the Atlantic, rises an island that seems to emerge from a Celtic dream. Skye, the largest of the Inner Hebrides, is a world unto itself, made of mountains that challenge the sky and coasts that shatter into 1,000 pieces against the waves. The wind seems to whisper ancient stories as you head toward Nice Point, the westernmost promontory of the island. Here, the land plunges into the ocean with a breathtaking drama. The White Lighthouse, solitary since 1909, watches over vertiginous cliffs where puffins and seagulls nest. There is also the Old Man of Storr, which rises with its rocky pinnacles that seem like giants' fingers pointed toward the sky. While in the fairy pools, crystalline waterfalls flow among the rocks, creating natural pools where, according to legend, the Highland fairies still bathe. Every valley hides ruined castles and lakes, where a perpetually changing sky is reflected. Skye is not just a place, it is an emotion that carves itself into memory forever. Loch Ness. In the depths of this 37-kilometer-long lake, something moves. Or at least so millions of people want to believe, who for decades have scanned its dark waters, hoping to glimpse Nessie, the world's most famous monster. But beyond the myth, this glacial lake in the Highlands hides a wild beauty that needs no legendary creatures to enchant. Its shores are embraced by pine forests, where the calls of red deer resonate, while ancient castles like Urquhart emerge from the morning mist, almost like ghosts. The lake, furthermore, contains more water than all English and Welsh lakes combined, and it is precisely this vastness, perhaps, that makes any mystery believable. The waters, in fact, reach 230 meters in depth, creating an underwater world still largely unexplored. But whether you believe in the monster Nessie or not, one thing is certain. Here, nature has created a spectacle that surpasses any fantasy. Here, every ripple of water can ignite the imagination and bring back childhood. Stirling. On a volcanic rock overlooking the plain stands the castle where Mary Stuart was born and lived, the most tragic queen in Scotland's history. Stirling has been called the key to Scotland because whoever controlled this city controlled the passage between the lowlands and the highlands. From the castle walls, the gaze embraces the battlefield of Bannockburn, where in 1314 the English were defeated, conquering Scottish independence. A short distance away, the ancient church of the Holy Rood witnesses centuries of history with its Gothic walls, while the surrounding cemetery guards the tombs of generations of Scots who served the crown. But it is another figure that dominates the horizon. And that is the 67-meter tower of the Wallace Monument, dedicated to William Wallace, the national hero who led Scottish resistance against English invasion in the 13th century. From the top, furthermore, the panorama extends to the first mountains of the Highlands. Stirling, therefore, is not just history, it is the symbol of Scotland's indomitable soul, where every stone cries freedom, but with the accent of generations of patriots. Glencoe. Imagine a valley where time seems to have stopped in the 13th century. Glencoe opens before you like a wound in the earth, carved by glaciers and bathed in the blood of history. Here in 1692, one of Scotland's most infamous massacres occurred. The Campbells treacherously slaughtered the MacDonalds who had hosted them, violating the sacred laws of Highland hospitality. But Glencoe is much more than a tragedy. Its mountains rise like guardians, with the Three Sisters, which are three enormous rocky peaks that dominate the valley. Every curve of the road reveals breathtaking panoramas, with waterfalls that plunge from vertical walls, heather that turns purple in summer, and lakes that reflect an ever-changing sky. And then when the mist descends from the peaks and envelops the valley, you understand why this place has inspired legends and nightmares. Glencoe is not just a destination, but an experience that leaves you with the awareness of having walked in history itself. St. Andrews. The salty scent of the ocean here mixes with the incense of Gothic ruins. St. Andrews is not just a picturesque university town overlooking the North Sea, but is the spiritual heart of Scotland, where Christianity and academic tradition have intertwined for centuries. The cathedral ruins, once Scotland's largest, rise against the sky. It was destroyed in 1559 by Protestant reformers, but its walls continue to tell stories of pilgrimages and faith. A few steps away, the University of St. Andrews, which is Scotland's oldest since 1413, hosts students who walk on cobblestones wearing traditional red gowns. But St. Andrews hides another secret. Here, in fact, golf was born. The Old Course, with its fairways shaped by sea wind, is the world's most famous golf course. Every golfer dreams of playing here, where it all began in the 15th century. William and Kate, for example, met right here, adding a touch of modern fairy tale to this timeless city. Fort William. At the feet of the giant of the British Highlands, which is Ben Nevis, Fort William welcomes you as a base for adventures that graze the sky. The giant Nevis, with its 1,345 meters, is the highest mountain in the United Kingdom. A colossus that can pass from Mediterranean climate at the base to Arctic climate at the summit, even in midsummer. The ascent requires 6 to 8 hours and a good dose of respect for a mountain that has already claimed victims. But whoever reaches the summit is rewarded with panoramas that extend to the Atlantic Islands. In Gaelic, it is called Poisonous Mountain, but it is a name that betrays the ancestral respect of the Highlanders for this capricious peak. A few kilometers away, furthermore, the Stial waterfalls plunge for 120 meters in a valley that seems to emerge directly from Lord of the Rings. Fort William, therefore, is not just a city, but the gateway to Europe's. Glasgow. Forget the gray and industrial image of Glasgow, because today it pulses with creative energy, like few cities in the world. In its streets resonate the chords of bands that made history, while colorful murals transform every corner of the city into an open-air art gallery. The majestic Gothic Cathedral of St. Mungo has dominated the city for almost 800 years. While nearby, the Victorian necropolis rises on a hill like a sort of city of the dead, with mausoleums and monuments that tell the glory of merchants of the era. But it is in the West End that Glasgow shows its most authentic face, with vintage markets, historic pubs, and the Gothic University of Glasgow, where Adam Smith studied. Finally, there is also the River Clyde, once the artery of the shipbuilding industry that built the Titanic, and which today reflects futuristic architectures. Glasgow is a city that has known how to reinvent itself without losing its working-class soul. Eilean Donan Castle. On a rocky islet where three lochs meet, rises Scotland's most photographed castle. Eilean Donan seems to float on the water, connected to the mainland by a stone bridge that appears and disappears with the tides. Built in the 13th century to defend against Viking raids, this manor has lived through sieges, betrayals, and destructions. In 1719, it was razed to the ground after hosting Spanish soldiers in revolt against the British government, and for 2 centuries it remained in ruins, until a lieutenant colonel of the McRae family rebuilt it stone by stone, following the original plans. The result is an architectural jewel that has served as backdrop for several films, although no director can compete with the natural spectacles that succeed each other here. In fact, there are northern lights visible from the towers, mists that wrap the castle like fairy mantles, and sunsets that set the loch on fire, transforming it into gold. Eilean Donan is true Scotland. That becomes poetry. Cairngorms National Park. Imagine a wilderness as large as Luxembourg, where you can walk for days without meeting a living soul. The Cairngorms are the last bastion of wild Scotland, a subarctic plateau where creatures still live that elsewhere are only memories, like lynx, wildcats, and sea eagles. Four of Scotland's 5 highest mountains are found here, including Cairngorm, which gives the park its name. These peaks, shaped by millennial glaciation, hide glacial cirques where snow resists until summer. There are also the ancient Caledonian pines, which are the survivors of the original Scottish forest and create natural habitats inhabited by red squirrels and deer. And it is precisely the fauna that makes this place unique. The reindeer, reintroduced in the 1950s, graze today on the Highlands like in the times of the Ice Age. In moonless nights, furthermore, it is said that you can still hear the howl of ghost wolves, extinct now for centuries, but never forgotten by these mountains that guard the secrets of ancient Scotland. Glenfinnan Viaduct. "21 stone arches curve for 380 meters across a breathtaking valley." The Glenfinnan Viaduct is the jewel of the West Highland Line, one of the world's most spectacular railways that winds for 264 kilometers through the wildest Scottish Highlands. This railway line, completed in 1901, represents a miracle of Victorian engineering that transformed an impassable territory into a corridor of unique beauty in the world. Its builders had to face peat bogs, mountains, and lakes, using only cement, sand, and local stones to create a structure that blends perfectly with the landscape. The Glenfinnan area, furthermore, is famous for the viaduct made famous by Harry Potter, where the cinematic Hogwarts Express passes, which offers passengers a marvelous spectacle that unites history and nature. In fact, under the arches, Loch Shiel stretches toward the horizon, while around the Highlands draw majestic profiles that lose themselves in the mist of distant peaks. Outer Hebrides. Here, Europe ends and infinity begins. The Outer Hebrides are a chain of islands that float in the Atlantic, like stones forgotten by a giant. Lewis, Harris, and Uist are names that taste of wind and sea salt. These islands still speak Gaelic. In fact, in the small villages, road signs are written first in this ancient Celtic language, then in English. On these islands, furthermore, on Sunday everything stops, because it is the Lord's Day in these Presbyterian communities among the most devout in Europe. And then there are the beaches that don't seem Scottish. Luscantire on the island of Harris flaunts white sand and turquoise water that would make the Caribbean envious. The difference lies only in the water temperature, which will quickly remind you where you really are. But it is at Callanish, on Lewis, that you truly understand the soul of these lands, with stone circles that emerge from the heather, older than Stonehenge and equally mysterious. Here, between Christian faith and pagan memory, the Hebrides show their true nature. Islands where the past never dies, but continues to live in the wind, that never stops blowing. Loch Lomond. A mirror of water that has made generations of Scots and travelers fall in love. Loch Lomond is Britain's largest lake by surface area, with 71 square kilometers of fresh water set between gentle hills and dramatic mountains. But its true magic lies in the 38 islands, scattered like confetti on its surface. Inchmurren, the largest island, hosts castle ruins and deer that swim from one shore to another, while in the waters live salmon and trout that always attract fishermen. The eastern shore is gentle and accessible, perfect for picnics and walks, while the western one becomes wild with mountains that dive directly into the water. The lake marks the border between the lowlands and the Highlands. Therefore, passing through here means entering another Scotland, that of legends and clans. It is no coincidence that the Scots say that whoever has not seen Loch Lomond has not seen Scotland. Inverness. Welcome to the capital of the Highlands. Inverness is the city where northern Scots come to shop, where tourists make their base to explore the mysteries of Loch Ness, and where ancient history and modern life mix effortlessly. The River Ness flows through the city center, creating an almost continental atmosphere. Along its banks you stroll, among gourmet restaurants and artisan shops. Inverness Castle, furthermore, built on a hill that dominates the city, is relatively young. In fact, it dates back to 1836. But rises on the site of a fortress that has seen centuries of Scottish history pass. From here, all the roads depart that lead to the islands, or to lost castles, or to battlefields where Scotland's destiny was decided. Inverness actually is not a destination, but a starting point. But it is undoubtedly also a place to stop, to breathe the Highland air and understand what it means to be Scottish in the 21st century. Isle of Mull. Mull welcomes with the scent of seaweed and the cry of seagulls. This inner Hebrides island is a concentrate of wild Scotland, just 40 minutes by ferry from the mainland. Its jagged coasts hide secret bays, where gray seals sunbathe on the rocks. In the interior, instead, sea eagles with enormous wings glide over glacial lochs, searching for salmon. Tobermory, the main port, flaunts colorful houses that reflect in the water, and this spectacle has even inspired a children's series. But Mull guards an even more precious treasure, being the gateway to the island of Iona, where in 563 AD St. Columba founded a monastery that became the center of Celtic Christianity. Here, 48 kings of Scotland are buried. But the island's true wild side we find on its mountains, where red deer, wildcats, and martens live. That's why for nature lovers, Mull is a paradise. Dunnottar Castle. On a rock that defies the ocean from 50 meters high, rises one of the world's most spectacular castles. Dunnottar seems to grow from the cliff itself, as if nature and man had collaborated to create something impossible. To reach it, you must descend a steep path that winds along the coast. Every step brings you closer to 1,400 years of Scottish history, where the Scottish crown jewels were hidden during Cromwell's invasion, or where William Wallace conquered one of his first victories. The castle is now a ruin. But what a ruin! Its walls merge with the rock, creating a breathtaking profile. Finally, on stormy days, Atlantic waves crash against the base of the cliff, sending spray up to the highest towers. Trossachs National Park. Where the lowlands region meets that of the Highlands, opens a fairy world made of lakes and forests that seem to emerge from a Celtic fairy tale. The Trossachs are Scotland in miniature, everything you dream of seeing in Scotland, but concentrated in an area as large as Rome. Here, several water jewels succeed each other, among which there is Loch Lomond, which is the largest and most celebrated, all surrounded by woods that await only to be discovered. Furthermore, the mountains are not very high, but they have personality. Benvenue, for example, means small mountain in Gaelic, but the view from its summit embraces a mosaic of lakes and valleys that makes you forget the fatigue of the climb. In the Trossachs, therefore, every trail tells a story. Every loch hides a legend. Portree. The most beautiful port of the Highlands awaits you on the Isle of Skye, with its colorful houses that overlook a bay protected by mountains. Portree, which in Gaelic means Port of the King, owes its name to a visit by James V in 1540. The waterfront houses seem to emerge from a fairy tale book, with pink, yellow, blue, green colors. Each one has a story. Each one hosts families who have lived here for generations. The port instead bustles with fishing boats that bring lobster and fresh crabs directly to local restaurant plates. From here also depart excursions towards Skye's wonders, like the Old Man of Storr, which is a 50-meter-high rock spire that defies gravity, or the Quairang, which is a lunar landscape created by ancient landslides. Or again the fairy pools, which are turquoise ponds where fairies are said to bathe. But Portree has a charm all its own. Precisely in the evening, when the lights turn on and reflect in the water, this small capital of the Inner Hebrides becomes the most romantic place in Scotland. Isle of Arran. Scotland in miniature. So they call this island, and it's not an exaggeration. In just 430 square kilometers, this island of the Firth of Clyde encompasses everything that makes Scotland unique. Castles, distilleries, mountains, beaches, and a wild nature that will make you forget you are just an hour from Glasgow. The north of the island is pure Highland style, with sharp mountains, wild glens, and Loch Castle that emerges from morning mist like a stone ghost. The south is instead gentler, with green hills where sheep with long reddish manes graze. Here, the Loch Lomond distillery produces one of Scotland's most appreciated whiskies, while the cheeses are famous throughout the United Kingdom. But the island's true wealth is its inhabitants, about 5,000 people who keep ancient traditions alive. Orkney Islands. "70 islands scattered in the ocean north of Scotland, where time seems to have stopped 5,000 years ago. The Orkneys guard Europe's best-preserved Neolithic sites. Skara Brae, for example, which is a stone village older than Stonehenge, where you can walk among houses with beds and hearths still intact. Or there is the Ring of Brodgar, a circle of monumental stones that rises mysteriously in the heather, witness to ancient rituals. It is incredible to think that these structures have resisted 50 centuries of Atlantic storms. But the Orkneys are important also for their waters, which are a paradise for marine fauna, with seals, whales, orcas, and millions of seabirds that nest on their cliffs. The wind always blows on these islands, and the inhabitants have transformed it into clean energy, producing more electricity than they consume, exporting the surplus to continental Scotland. Bealach Na Ba. This is the most spectacular road of the British Highlands. Bealach Na Ba, which in Gaelic means Pass of the Cattle, is a ribbon of asphalt that climbs for 626 meters of altitude, with hairpin turns that take your breath away and panoramas that will make you forget fear. This road, built in 1822, was the only way to reach the remote village of Applecross on the western coast, with gradients up to 20% and impossible hairpin curves. Precisely for this reason, it has become a pilgrimage for motorcyclists and motorists from all over the world. From the pass, the view embraces the islands of Skye and Rossi, while below extends a wild valley. On the other side, instead, there is Applecross, a small paradise overlooking the ocean, where time flows slowly and where Applecross Inn serves fish and chips with a view of the inner Hebrides. After such a demanding road, that plate of fried fish tastes like victory. Doune Castle. This golden stone castle has a secret. It is one of the most famous in cinema, without many noticing. Its massive walls and imposing towers have served as backdrop for films and TV series that have conquered the world. The castle rises on a hill that dominates a river and a green valley, and was built 600 years ago as a true fortress, with walls 2 meters thick, very high towers, and an entrance that seems like a trap for enemies. Whoever built it certainly knew well how to defend himself. Today, instead, it has become famous for 2 completely different reasons. First, it appeared in a British comedy, then it became the home of a Scottish family in a romantic TV series. So a medieval fortress became a Hollywood star, proving that even the oldest stones can capture modern hearts. Ullapool. A small fishing port overlooking a fjord that seems Norwegian. Ullapool is the jewel of the Western Highlands, where colorful boats sway in a port protected by mountains, and the scent of fresh fish mixes with that of seawater. Founded in 1788 to develop the herring fishing industry, Ullapool still maintains the appearance of a perfectly preserved Georgian village, with white houses that reflect in the waters of Loch Broom, creating postcards that seem too beautiful to be true. From here also depart ferries to the Outer Hebrides, but the city deserves a prolonged stop, also thanks to its restaurants that serve fresh seafood, while local pubs resonate with traditional music on summer evenings. And then there is also a museum that tells the story of this community. Or you can simply stroll along the port at sunset when the mountains turn pink. Callanish Stones. Older than Stonehenge, more mysterious than the pyramids. The Callanish Stones on the island of Lewis are a granite enigma that has challenged archaeologists and visitors for 5,000 years. "13 monoliths arranged in a Celtic cross with a central circle that guards a Neolithic tomb. But why did our ancestors transport these enormous stones here? To observe the stars? For religious rituals? To mark territory? No one knows for certain. What we know is that every 18.5 years, the full moon seems to walk along the southern horizon, touching the hills that surround the site. The builders of Callanish certainly knew this astronomical phenomenon and oriented the stones to capture it. Furthermore, the name of this Gaelic site means hard promontory, and here the Atlantic wind always blows, bringing mists that wrap the megaliths and creating supernatural atmospheres. Dundee. It's the city of the three J's: jute, jam, and journalism. Dundee was for decades an industrial city overlooking the Tay estuary, famous for having invented marmalade and produced jute canvas for the entire British Empire. Today it has reinvented itself as Scotland's capital of design and technology. The new Victoria and Albert Museum has transformed the city waterfront into a world-class cultural destination, but Dundee maintains its working-class character. In its pubs, in fact, they still drink local beer and tell stories of when jute factories employed thousands of workers. There is also the Discovery, which is the ship with which Captain Scott explored Antarctica, and is moored in the port, becoming a floating museum. Aberdeen. The granite city overlooking the North Sea has a port that tells two different Scotlands. On one side, the fishing boats that still bring fresh cod and haddock. On the other, the supply ships that serve the North Sea oil platforms. Aberdeen is the European capital of offshore oil, but maintains its maritime soul, in fact the old fishing port, with its gray granite houses, coexists with the modern structures of the oil industry. Along Union Street instead, which is the main course, there are still fishing shops next to luxury boutiques. The city itself is a jewel of granite architecture, where 19th century buildings and Gothic churches create a unique urban landscape that shines with 1,000 shades of gray when the sun's rays hit the local stone. Aberdeen is a city that works, that produces, that never stops, and its port is the beating heart of an economy that looks to the future without forgetting its roots. Isle of Islay. Welcome to the Mecca of Scottish whiskey. Islay is an inner Hebrides island that hosts 9 distilleries in just 620 square kilometers. Here, whiskey has a flavor that divides the world between those who love it and those who hate it, and precisely for this reason, the island's distilleries produce some of the most characteristic whiskeys ever. Their secret is peat, that fossil fuel that is burned to dry malted barley, giving the distillate unmistakable smoky notes. Furthermore, the coasts host 20,000 wild geese that arrive from the Arctic every winter, creating an extraordinary natural spectacle. Continuing, the island has a population of only 3,000 inhabitants, but during the annual Whiskey Festival, thousands of enthusiasts arrive from all over the world, and for a week it becomes incredibly lively and deafening. Plockton. Nestled on the shores of a Scottish fjord, this small Highland village is an unexpected corner of paradise. Known as the Village of Palms, thanks to its mild microclimate that allows these tropical plants to grow at improbable latitudes, Plockton seems painted by a romantic artist. Its colorful little houses reflect in the tranquil waters of Loch Arran, while in the background, Scottish mountains create a dramatic frame. Here, time flows slowly to the rhythm of the tides. Fishermen return with their catch, feeding local restaurants with fresh seafood. Boat excursions to spot seals or walks along the coast offer intimate contact with wild and uncontaminated nature, giving visitors an experience of peace and unparalleled beauty. Concluding this visual journey through Scotland, we have moved from the charm of its misty highlands and medieval castles to historic cities and wild landscapes, exploring together not only places, but also traditions that make every corner of this land unique. We hope that the images and stories told have enriched your knowledge and stimulated the desire to personally explore the extraordinary beauty of this fascinating country.